I've mentioned this before, but I'm a huge fan of Square Enix's new HD-2D style. If you're unfamiliar with what HD-2D is, well, you're probably seeing it right now in the B-roll footage, but I'll explain exactly what it means just in case. HD-2D is a graphical style pioneered and popularized by Square Enix that blends the 2D aesthetic of old 16-bit RPGs with modern 3D environments. Games that feature an HD-2D style utilize pixelated textures mapped to a 3D plane for things such as characters, NPCs, and some environmental aspects, with other elements like terrain and buildings being modeled in full 3D, but in a way that makes them appear as if they came right out of a 2D game. In other words, these games like Octopath Traveler, Triangle Strategy, Live Alive, and the new remake of Dragon Quest III appear to be 2D games that came to life, so to speak. And as Square Enix has shown heavy interest in even further increasing their repertoire of HD-2D games, I thought it would be a fun video idea to go over some of the main benefits to adopting an HD-2D style, as well as why I love this type of game so much. So for starters, can we just talk about how visually stunning HD-2D games look? The melding of 3D and 2D elements makes the game look like a pop-up book in motion, which is a really appealing aesthetic in my opinion. You can feel the 16-bit influence in literally everything you look at, and that evokes a certain nostalgia and charm which is hard to replicate with a full 3D game. If you asked me what my favorite element of HD-2D games is, it would undoubtedly be this, as I'm sure it is for many fans. According to Square Enix, the goal here was always to emulate the style of SNES-era JRPGs, and they have succeeded immensely in that respect in my opinion. As a giant SNES fan myself, I honestly couldn't think of a better way to represent the games of that generation if I tried, and I'd even go as far as to say that HD-2D feels to me like the natural evolution of SNES games. The jump to full 3D was great and all, but certain aspects of 2D games that made them special and really charming in their own right were lost in that leap forward. HD-2D restores many of these aspects and even enhances them in some cases. If you want some specifics, there is of course 2D sprite work, the embracing of low resolution and frame rate, as well as simplified yet fun and great looking animations. However, since these are still partially 3D games, you also have many benefits unique to a 3D space like depth, lighting, and fluid mechanics. Lighting in particular plays a major role in Square Enix's HD-2D games. If you look at literally any area in one of these games, we see a stark contrast between dark and light. Sections that are lit up are usually really bright, making them pop when put next to the more shadowy sections of an area. We've also got things like shadows of clouds flowing above, god rays for enhanced ambience, atmospheric torchlight, and sunlight shimmering on rivers and oceans. They really went in on the lighting in a lot of these games, and I personally think that was a great decision. Upping the quality of lighting and making it very pronounced is a way to play up the benefits of a 3D game without taking away anything from the 2D aesthetic, which is what's most important here in my opinion. If you were to start increasing graphical fidelity and replacing 2D sprite work with 3D models, that would completely defeat the purpose of an HD 2D game, so finding other ways to improve the visuals of these games was paramount. It's called HD 2D after all. And another way they did this besides lighting was through the use of enhanced focus, or at least that's what I call it. Enhanced focus is essentially very dramatically blurring out things in the background to make the foreground very clearly the focus of what's going on. Some people seem to dislike this blurring, but in my opinion it helps draw the attention to where it's needed, while also giving things in the background an interesting look to them that doesn't interfere with the 2D style of the game. It also makes things that are really far away look almost like a skybox, which is a pretty neat effect. Speaking of neat effects, the way the blurred out backgrounds slowly fade into focus as you approach them looks really cool in my opinion as well. But I think that's enough gushing about how the visuals actually look. Now let's talk about why a company like Square Enix may find it beneficial to use this style of graphics. Now of course I'm not a game developer or anything like that, so take all of this with a grain of salt, but based on what I can tell, it seems to be faster, easier, and less expensive to make a game in the HD 2D style when compared to a full 3D game of average to above average visual quality. How did I come up with this idea? Well, let's go through these 3 points individually and discuss just that. First up, the idea that it's faster to make an HD 2D game. This is a really easy one to explain. We know based on an interview with the producer of Live Alive that game began development back in 2019. That means it only took about 3 years to complete, even with the development cycle directly overlapping with the COVID-19 pandemic, which, according to the producer, definitely slowed things down a bit. Now, of course, Live Alive is a remake, so things like story, gameplay style, characters, and locations were already set in stone from the get-go, which would no doubt reduce the development time. But even still, this game could potentially have been completed in around 2 years were it not for COVID. That's an insanely fast turnover when compared to something like Final Fantasy VII Remake, which was announced in June of 2015 and released in April of 2020. Now, that window isn't necessarily representative of the length of the development cycle, but it's at least a good indicator of about how long the game took to complete. Clearly, an HD-2D remake would take less time to complete than a high-fidelity, full 3D overhaul, and this shorter turnover could be extremely beneficial to a company like Square because it means they put out more games in less time, and the visuals still look great like we just talked about. They just take less time to make because of the nature of what they are. The second point I mentioned was that HD-2D graphics are easier to make. Now, like I said, I don't know all the details here, but based on what I've experienced and read about HD-2D games, the process of creating these visuals does seem easier than making a high-quality full 3D game. Now, I'm mostly just assuming here, but I believe the developers mapped pixelated textures to a thin plane in 3D space to make a sprite. They then created a bunch of these to make animations for characters and objects, and voila, you have the HD-2D effect. As for the full 3D models, they also seem very easy to make, as they're rather low poly and also use pixelated textures. Once again, I'm no expert, but it would seem to me that the sprite approach would be much easier than making a detailed 3D model with animations. Now, as for HD-2D graphics being cheaper to make, that's something we can infer from the previous 2 points. If something takes less time and is easier, in the world of video games, generally it'll cost less money to make. In this case, the money would be money paid to artists for their time and effort, which would most likely be less overall. Kind of going along with the idea of HD-2D games being fast and easy to make, we have the next point, which is that they are less intensive to run. This can be seen very clearly by the fact that Octopath Traveler, Triangle Strategy, and Live Alive are all games that can run on the Nintendo Switch. If there's one thing that the Switch is known for, it's its lack of power, so being able to run games that look this good on one of these means a lot. There is just no way that a big Square Enix blockbuster like Final Fantasy VII Remake or the upcoming Final Fantasy XVI could run on a Switch without reducing the graphical fidelity significantly, and even then it might still be too much for the little guy. The Switch and other less powerful devices represented a potential missed opportunity for Square Enix, but thanks to HD-2D, they've been able to take full advantage of those markets as well. It's almost like HD-2D games were built just to perform well on the Switch. Oh wait, they were. Now, aside from Square Enix, there's also the potential for other companies who normally would have trouble getting their games on Nintendo's consoles to take advantage of the Switch. Just make an HD-2D style game and you're good to go. I don't know about you guys, but I'd love to see companies that have similarly long histories in the gaming industry take advantage of their back catalogs through more HD-2D remakes. And that just so happens to tie in really nicely with our last point here, the fact that HD-2D is the perfect device for remakes of older titles. Now obviously HD-2D was made with the SNES in mind, but I don't think we should be limiting ourselves to just that console. In my opinion, games from the NES, the Sega Master System, the Sega Genesis, the Game Boy Advance, and even the Nintendo DS, to a degree, are prime targets for HD-2D remakes. I'm sure there are other consoles that would work too, but those are the main ones in my opinion. I mean, could you imagine an HD-2D remake of games like Pokemon Gold and Silver, Zelda the Minish Cap, or heck, even Sonic would be pretty cool with this style in my opinion. Now, obviously, the SNES is the main attraction here, with the possibility for great remakes of games like Chrono Trigger, Super Mario RPG, Demon's Crest, Tornado, Go-Go Ackman, so on and so forth, but I think we should also be trying to expand the number of consoles HD-2D remakes span, because as of right now, there's just so many great games that could benefit immensely from this type of remake. How would they benefit exactly? Well, just take a look at the previous 3 things we talked about, and I'm sure you'll be able to see benefits from both a consumer and developer standpoint. But anyway, that's pretty much all I wanted to talk about in this video. I know it was a bit short compared to my usual videos, but I figured every once in a while a shorter video could be a nice change of pace. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the ride all the same. Also, let me know if there's any specific games that you'd like to see remade in the HD-2D style. I'd love to hear some more ideas that maybe I wouldn't normally come up with. And if you did happen to enjoy today's video, consider giving it a like. It's always greatly appreciated and helps me out a ton. And if you want to see more content like this in the future, consider subscribing as well. As always, thanks so much for watching, everybody, and I'll see you in the next one. Back out. Ooh, I just thought of this, but imagine this. HD-2D Paper Mario. Boom. You're welcome, Nintendo.